Hello, it's Philip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London. This morning I'm looking at a book which has come to us from Edward Elgar Publishing Limited, who are independent publishers of law books and other materials at a very high level academically. They're always of great importance to us both in the academic world and certainly as practitioners. This one's quite curious because the title is Citizen Journalists. Now, I've been one of those in the sense that I have taken part as an elected politician, writing my own blog on the various websites when in the earlier days when things were just starting. And I did find it quite useful because we all learnt a great deal as people who were not full-time professional journalists. I'm a barrister at law, and therefore it was important for me to get some idea of how to produce stories and basically how to look at things. So from that standpoint and that starting off point, we then got a book which is looking at, in fact, the way that this type of media is going to be going in the future. This is the book itself. There we go. You can see it's a hardback. That's the front. Then there is the spine. And then on the back there's some detail. It's been written by Ian Cram, and it's got a subtitle, Newer Media, Republican Moments and the Constitution. And this is part of the Elgar Monographs in Constitutional and Administrative Law. And the series editors are Rosalind Dixon, Susan Rose Ackerman and Mark Tushnet. Now you can see from that information the book is also available as an e-book, which is detailed there. The back of the book has a good index. There isn't a bibliography because that's actually included in the actual footnotes, and you do have a lot of detailed footnotes, as you can probably see from there. You do have subheadings as well. Going to the front of the book, when you get, there we go, that is the front, Ian's name on the front, from the School of Law, University of Leeds. This is the Monographs series which Elgar produce. Then there's some detail about the book and how to get to Elgar online if you need to use it for that purpose. And then the contents. There are 6 chapters and an index, and there's a useful table of cases covering various countries and different jurisdictions. And then you've got some legislation, just a little bit of legislation there again. And then it starts off, introduction, Republican Moments, Machiavelli and Digital Communications. He says, and I'm going to quote it later, he talks about the serious discussion on freedoms of expression. And he starts off as he means to go on. And what I did find useful was the conclusion at the back in chapter 6. He's given it the title, The Skeptical Cyber Republican. I wouldn't stress too much the word Republican. I tended to look at it in a slightly different way, but the conclusion itself I think is very helpful, and it is written in a particularly reasonably easy style, but a highish style as well, which I'll come on to. Now, what do we say about the book? Well, Elizabeth and I looked at the book. We've written a review, which is on the web and in the journals. And the review title we've given, it's not on all of the sites at the moment, it's still coming in, but we've given it The Phenomenon of Citizen Journalism, explored both legally and constitutionally. And this is how we start. What a curious title for a book, we thought, when we read the introduction to citizen journalism, where author Ian Cram explains his objective in studious detail. It's actually called Student Journalist, not Student Journalism, but don't worry if you spot the slight difference there. Any serious discussion he starts off the book with, this is in the introduction, is about a discussion of freedom of expression and news gathering and dissemination, he says, and it needs to consider the available evidence about emerging trends in which news content is generated and disseminated. Hence my point earlier about the blogs, the early blogs that I had as an elected politician. And of course that is exactly what Cram is producing here in terms of looking at these emerging trends in what is actually a short, it's not a very big book, but it's a remarkably succinct piece of legal scholarship. And the monograph begins with this rather interesting introduction title on Republican Moments, Machiavelli and Digital Communications. And that gives you, the reader, I think, a flavour of what is to come with the detail and contents and the high style of writing which Cram produces for citizen journalists throughout the book. The author then warms to his theme, exploring the following contemporary points and intriguing chapter heads. Now, I don't make any excuses for the fact that I think some of the titles he's got here are a little bit sort of purple patchy. I know the colour of the book is green, but listen to the titles and you'll see what he's talking about, because he is at a high style, but you can glean the information about what he's talking about at whatever level you really want to pick. But these are the titles of the chapters: A Digital Republic of Citizens Against Civility, Arguments for Protecting Bad Taste, Disrespectful and Anonymous Online Speakers, Beyond the Fourth Estate, Rethinking the Privileges of Journalists in the Era of New Media, very important of course, Google and the Unvirtuous Juror, and comparative constitutional analysis of some digital challenges to fair trials. So there's plenty of food for journalistic thought for all of us here. And I'm not going to spoil it by going into a lot of detail about what those chapter headings are. But I hope that's given you a taste of what he's got in there, because this is very much a 21st century book, and it's the sort of challenges we're now facing in the society we've got with the internet. Now, the conclusion covers what he calls skeptical cyber republican. That's the title. It's Skeptical Cyber Republican, followed by a useful index, which of course is quite detailed. We'll have a look at the book again at the end of the review. Now, a leading academic has commented on this book, and I'm going to use some of his words and explain what he says. Eric Heinz has commented that even more than the occasional and fleeting right to vote, he says, citizens' equal and peremptory prerogatives of expression within public discourse distinguish post-World War II democracies from all earlier and rival forms of government. Now, I know what he's talking about here, and you can see how far we've come since that time, because what he's basically saying is things have opened up, and rightly too, because that is certainly the way blogging has gone, and you've seen some of the consequences on Facebook and Twitter with some of the appalling behaviour of people who are not trolls but criminals. Let's get it right, they're criminals. Now, Heinz then goes on to offer his own point of view of citizen journalists, worth repeating here, I think, and that is that, quote, in fundamentally transforming public discourse, electronic media transforms, and I've added the S there, the very conditions of political legitimacy. Now, that's, again, an important point, because actually we are talking about communication and giving information to the electorate, if one thinks about it, and to the people at large. Now, he then concludes that Cram's thesis in the book continues to innovate at the forefront of the free speech debates by exploring this historical shift in the way we speak and therefore in the way we govern ourselves. So there's the link directly between the legal framework of what we're now allowed to do, what we weren't allowed to do in the past, or there weren't the facilities for it, and in fact where we're going in the future, because we are looking at this shift in the way that we actually do things. In other words, we come back to the path which this form of expression is actually taking with the electronic media of the future. So I think the book itself is very much looking ahead at where we're going to be going in perhaps the next 5 to 10 years. Now, I think Edward Elgar, again, are to be congratulated for grasping this subject matter, because it's very important, and for publishing what is a thought-provoking and curiously informative, I thought, work, which sums up its core point as exploring what is the phenomenon of citizen journalism from both a legal and a constitutional perspective. And of course, Ian Cram describes and evaluates emerging patterns of communication between a new and diverse set of speakers and their audiences, and I think we're all the better for that. What Cram has produced here then, in our view, has been to build upon general political theory and balance how far the constitutional and legal frameworks of modern liberal states allow for what he calls contestatory space. That's an interesting phrase, contestatory space, which develops the scope for non-traditional speakers to participate in policy debates and to hold elites to account. In other words, you're getting a whole new developed franchise. In the past, for instance, you go knock on people's doors and they wouldn't be interested or want to express much of an opinion. What you've got today, and that's canvassing for opinions and votes and all the other things you do. Now, what you've got today, of course, is a different system, because you've got the media, the new media, and people do express themselves. And a lot of them have got a lot of views. One thing I've found as a candidate in elections, and I've fought 15 election campaigns, is how people, especially if you are the candidate, want to talk to you. Even if they may be shy if you're actually representing someone else. But if you're actually the candidate, they want to talk to you. And they're not shy about it either, which I find the beauty, of course, of electioneering. But that's another story. Now, let me go on by saying that a modern interpretation then of what is being put forward here is that it leads to a bit of a free-for-all in the future of journalism itself, where there are many fewer checks and balances today on what is produced, including things like the standard of quality and possible defamations which might be made. Now, that of course is again interesting from a legal perspective, because we still have not really understood the power of Twitter, Facebook and all these other sites, and they are really quite urgently, I think, in need of probably some form of regulation, both nationally and internationally. But that again is another story. Let me conclude by saying that we would give the final word to Cram for his chapter 6 conclusion, which I mentioned a rather confusing title. I did find the titles of the chapters a little confusing until I got into the book itself. But he says this as an ominous but interesting parting shot. At the present time, then, it makes little sense to talk of there being institutional protection for new media in a way that secures a contestatory space via constitutional protection for the valuable tumult and discord that is produced by digital communicators, i.e. trolls. So what I advise you to do is do read citizen journalists if you're a lawyer or a writer, because there are these new types of hack who've appeared who could be the forerunner of some big changes in this modern method of communication as the 21st century unfolds, just so long as freedom of expression is retained and not devalued. And I end on that note. I think this is a very interesting book. The title got us very interested right at the beginning. There it is. Let me open it up in the middle. Here we go. A Digital Republic of Citizens. And falling short of idealised Republican discourse, some problematic aspects of citizen journalism and the privately owned infrastructures that carry speech. We see we are entering a new era, and I think he's grappled that pretty well. Against civility, again, an important area. I think a few people who've been very offensive on Twitter, he mentions Twitter and Facebook a lot, might find this very useful to read. Of course, there's a lot of information about America in here as well, because they have actually been leading the way. But this is only a small book. It runs to under 200 pages. But it's a lovely little book to read, and I'm very grateful to Ian and to Eric Heinz from Queen Mary University, the University of London, for producing an excellent commentary on it as well, which I've used. So thank you to both of them. Do read the book. And once again, I'd like to thank Elgar for producing it. Bye-bye.